This video is provided by the site Tensoku, the organization that defines and manages the art of Tensoku. Learn more about our art by visiting tensoku.com. Hello, I'm Rich Munson, and I want to talk about the octagon. The octagon is a core fundamental concept in Tensoku, and it's important that students and practitioners have a solid understanding of this concept before they get too deeply involved in our studies. We'll talk a little bit about the octagon shape itself and the various angles that we use. And then we'll talk about where we use the octagon, globally, locally, and from a vertical perspective. And then finally, we use a lot of abbreviations when we talk about the octagon. So I want to cover those abbreviations for you so that you'll understand them and appreciate them when you encounter them online, in our student manuals, in our books, and other material. But first, we'll talk about the octagon shape itself. As you probably already know, the octagon is an 8-sided shape, but we'll cover that for those who may need a refresher or for younger students who may not have encountered this yet. So the octagon is represented by the diagram behind me for the outer dark lines, the outer black lines. So we have this shape that has these 8 sides to it. And in Tensoku later we're concerned about the sides, but at the initial levels of training, we're mostly concerned about the angles that intersect 2 sides. So we're interested more in this angle or this angle where they intersect a side than we are about the actual side itself. We have a number of angles here. So if we think about this shape being projected on the floor, and then we're standing directly in the center, then we would be looking forward at angle 1, which is at the top, or directly ahead of us if this was on the floor. Angle 2 would be then directly behind us. Angle 3 would be to our left. Angle 4 would be to our right. Angle 5 is up and to the left or forward and to the left. Angle 7 is forward and to the right. Angle 6, which is opposite angle 5, is back and to the right, and angle 8, which is opposite angle 7, is back and to the left. So those are the fundamental angles, and we use them in different ways, which we'll cover in a few minutes. This can be used from a vertical sense and from a horizontal sense. We'll cover that all in a bit. But often when you think about the octagon, you think about this laying on the floor and you're standing at this center point, and these various angles are relative to your position. So if I'm standing here and angle 3 is over here, that means my angle 1 is over here. So angle 3 is there, angle 1 is there, angle 4, which is my right side, is over here, and then angle 2 is directly behind me, angle 5, angle 7, angle 6, and angle 8. We'll cover all that in a little bit more detail when we talk about global angles and local angles, but I just want to give you a general appreciation initially what these angles are and where they point. So next we'll talk about using the octagon from a global perspective. When we think about the octagon from a global perspective, what we're really talking about is using the octagon with a spatial reference. The most common place you'll encounter that is in a dojo, where a wall, a window, a door, or some other object in the dojo is unofficially identified as global angle 1. So students would typically face that angle when they begin a kata, and then perform the movements in the kata using that angle 1 as their spatial reference. You might also use this if you were outside somewhere. You might designate a tree or a rock or a lake as angle 1 and then move spatially relative to that angle 1. So it's a common way of spatially orienting yourself so that you've defined an angle 1, and no matter what you do, that angle 1 doesn't change. So if I've defined this wall, there's a wall there, if I define that wall as angle 1, then no matter where I move, that will always be angle 1. It's global. So So that's angle 1. If I turn and face over here, that is still angle 1. This is still my angle 4. So no matter what I do, once I've established a spatial reference, it never changes. That's not the case with some of the other representations we use, but in a global environment, once you've established angle 1, you move relative to that angle. All the movements are relative to that angle. We use this a lot in kata. All of our kata are defined, for the most part anyway, with global references, so that once you are pointed one direction, you know how to move relative to that position. So global angles are very commonly used, especially early on. Later you'll encounter some local angle use, but for the initial several belts, the primary reference is global. So hopefully that helps you give some perspective of how we use the global angles. Next we'll talk about using local angles. The local octagon reference system is quite different than the global system. The global system, as we discussed, is spatially oriented, but the local system is self or body oriented. So wherever I move or point, the octagon kind of goes with me. It's almost as though the octagon were strapped to me. Wherever I move, the octagon goes with me. So let's kind of go through an example. So previously we had defined this to be our general global angle 1. And if I'm facing that way, that's also my local angle 1. The difference occurs when I move. So if I turn and face global angle 4, this is my local angle 1. So no matter where I move, my local angle 1 is always directly in front of me. Local angle 3 is always to my left. Local angle 4 is always to my right. And local angle 2 is always behind me, no matter where I'm pointing. This is not something we want to use to define something like a kata. It'd be very confusing to say move relative to where you were all the time. So we always use the global system when we're defining a kata. But you will find that this system is very useful when you're in close contact with somebody and you want to move relative to your current position. It's very useful for describing how that movement will occur. So you won't encounter this system very much if you're a lower ranking student, but as you gain some elevation in rank, you will encounter this form of reference. So we want to introduce it to you so that you have some appreciation for it. Next, we want to talk about the vertical orientation system, which is much simpler and much easier to appreciate. So let's talk about that now. The vertical orientation system is pretty much what you see on the wall behind me. The octagon is oriented vertically. Angle 1 is at the top, angle 2 is at the bottom, angle 3 is to the left, angle 4 is to the right. And this is used more when we're talking about weaponry and how weapons move. So if we say something is striking from angle 1, you would appreciate that it's coming down from angle 1. If we said the strike was occurring from angle 4, then it would be a horizontal strike coming from angle 4. Conversely, we could say it's a strike toward angle 4, which would suggest it's moving from the center and out towards angle 4. So the same thing would apply to angle 6, angle 7. So you might have a strike coming in from angle 7 that could be targeting maybe a shoulder or the neck. Coming in from angle 2 would probably be something striking to the groin. So that gives us a way of identifying the path of the weapon in a vertical sense. So it's much easier to understand than the local system was. You just imagine the octagon being projected vertically in front of you, and that gives you a pretty good idea how to move a weapon. Next, we want to talk a little bit about the abbreviations we use when we talk about the octagon in our written materials. Octagon abbreviations are pretty straightforward. They're not very complex. They're essentially a letter followed by a number. The number represents some angle of the octagon, and the letter suggests how you'll move. So we'll cover a few of these so that you have an appreciation for them when you encounter them in our written materials. L stands for left. It almost always means your left leg. So if we say L1, it means move your left leg toward angle 1. If I said R4, it would mean move my right leg to angle 4. You may see these combined into a single word. So you might have L1R4 as a single sequence with no space between them. And that would say that you're going to move both legs in rapid succession, L1R4, as one movement sequence. You might see 3 or 4 of those movements strung together as one word, and that suggests that you'll be moving those things in that order back to back very quickly without any pause. You'll also encounter the letter A, the letter T, and the letter F. A stands for at. So if I'm asked to look A2, that would say look back at angle 2. So A is for at, tells you, where to look, or sometimes where to strike, but usually where to look. The T would say toward, so you might punch toward angle 7. So you might have T7, so it might say, Idari Kinzuki T7. So that tells you where to deliver that strike. And then you may encounter the F symbol quite a bit, and that tells you where you're facing. So you might be asked to establish Sochindachi F4, which would mean to establish Sochindachi in which you're facing angle 4. So you might be asked to establish Migi Sochindachi F4, and that would be that stance if that was angle 4. You'll see the V and a number. That's used almost exclusively when we're dealing with a weapon. It can be pretty confusing if you're moving around on the floor with those octagon angles and then you're dealing with a different set of octagon angles in a vertical sense when you're moving a weapon around. So we use V to indicate that we're talking about a vertical octagon angle rather than one that's on the floor. So you might see something that says strike toward V4, which tells you you're striking on a vertical octagon reference towards angle 4. You'll also encounter 2 other abbreviations. One is CW, stands for counterclockwise. So if you're moving, clockwise. So if you're moving clockwise, you're going to be moving generally from the angle 1 position in the direction of angle 4. Counterclockwise, CCW, would have you move in the opposite direction. So you'd be moving from angle 1 towards angle 3. So those are fairly common abbreviations, obviously reference the movement of clock hands, and we use those fairly extensively when we're talking about rotational movements in katas and in drills. So that's a general overview of the abbreviations we use. I hope that helps you appreciate our written material a little bit better. We've also talked about the octagon itself, talked a little bit about how we use it globally, locally, and in a vertical sense. And I hope that's helped you a lot, and thank you very much for watching.